And welcome back to the CODESHO podcast, everybody. Today we have Serge on the line. Serge and Matt went to school at DigiPen together. So, as usual with Matt's guest, I'm going to hand it off to him to introduce.
Okay. Hey, so yeah, thanks for coming on, Serge. Serge, yeah, like we did go to school together. We were on a game team together for like 2 years, actually. Like that game project lasted a long time. And then Serge went on to work at companies like Apple and Amazon and AMD, and now he works at Google. So like he's got some experience.
We
So
have him dialed in, by the way, on the phone.
oh
So,
yeah. So like he's not up on the screen today. Um, yeah, so we're gonna get into all of that, but how are you doing, Serge?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, really. Okay, so uh, I always like to start it off by asking like how and why you got started. So we did meet like early on, I think first semester of freshman year. But what got you into programming and what led you to go to DigiPen?
Yes, that one is pretty easy actually. I was always really into video games. I think I remember one of my first consoles was Sega Genesis, and yeah, ever since I got into ever since I started playing video games, I really got hooked into them, and I got a Dreamcast, PlayStation, and whatnot, and then uh, after high school, when time came to actually figure out what I wanted to do, I thought what I wanted to do was making video games. I was vastly wrong. It was just clearly I was badly mistaken. But
Because you haven't made any video games since school, right?
I have not made any
Yeah.
video games at all. But yeah, that got me really interested in video games, and then yeah, like Matt, like you said, we went to DigiPen, which is predominantly a
Mhm.
video game college, even though it's real time interactive simulations. And then I learned programming and 3D math and all the stuff you need for making graphics and general purpose programming.
So had you ever programmed before going to DigiPen? Did you do any of it in high school or anything?
Yeah, so not really. I think my senior year of high school, I actually got interested in programming, and then I, on my own, because I'm not even sure whether at that time my high school had, um, you know, extracurricular activities that related to programming. So I don't think so. But on the side, I picked up this programming book. I mean, programming magazine first, and then I bought a book on C, and then I just got like some very basic stuff going, like a program where you could enter your name, or I remember like making a basic program to like solve a quadratic, um,
Oh,
just basic
cool.
stuff like that. And then it
Yeah.
was yeah, it was. So by the time I got to Japan, like I mostly knew the basics of C, no pointers, just mostly stuff like related to loops and basic variable declaration, and maybe arrays, and but
Mhm.
that was about it.
Yeah. The here's I'm trying to remember my first memory of Surge, and I don't remember exactly,
Uh
but I like so I don't remember
oh.
exactly. But what I do know is so like right from the start, where like DigiPen's heavily because it's video games, it's heavily like math like oriented, right? And so like the first math class we took is a linear algebra class, and so we're in this class together, and so if you remember from my first like story about my past, I was in a band, and I was actually still in a band my first semester of DigiPen, but I was maybe 24, so I'd been out of school for 6 years, and I was in like a punk rock band, so there was some drinking, and so my math skills were like super rusty,
mm,
and so I think we took a test and. I got like a low C on it. And I remember like Serge and there's another guy, but I don't remember his name, but they had gotten like really high scores. And I was like, well, those guys are smart. Those guys are smart. Yeah. So,
so what ended up, what kind of derailed you from doing video games professionally? You just didn't find a job doing it out of the gate, or you realized that you didn't want to do it, or?
That's a great question. I think so. Um, I think it's a little bit of both. So first of all, it's true that I did not get any job offers from any video game company. I actually think I don't remember it. Yeah, I don't even think I even heard back from any of the video game companies I had applied. But I did hear back from Apple and Nvidia, and so none of them were, none of the positions were about gaming. They're all about general purpose programming. Yeah, except for Apple ones was actually about driver development, which is just the low level software that sits between the game and the or the 3D application and the hardware.
So coming out.
I didn't.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, I just got an offer from Apple out of school, and so that was the only one I could really take. There was just no other options for me at the time.
So did you feel like coming out of DigiPen as a game school, you were prepared for a job like that?
The one at Apple?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think yes and no. I think honestly, like I said, I actually discussed that a few years ago with someone who was doing an interview for DigiPen. I think the most important skill that we acquired was just the ability to learn engineering stuff. Like just you're faced with an engineering problem you don't necessarily know or understand, and then you just have to like work through it and then just figure it out. So in that sense, I think yes, DigiPen prepared us well. Now, in terms of like the day-to-day like programming of writing a graphics driver, definitely not. But then no school would really no school would prepare you for this. I think it's so specific. But yeah, you know programming, you know the basic stuff. So then you learn a lot of it as you go through it.
So as someone outside looking in, especially as somebody with programming experience, but I mean, I'm sure it would be even more if I didn't. That is just like crazy impressive that you go straight out of college to writing graphics drivers. That's insane. That's super, super cool. Props to you. What did you do while you were working there to like continuously prepare yourself and make sure that you had the skill that you needed to do that job? Were you studying outside, or was there any books that you were reading? Like, how did you day to day keep yourself prepared and sharp for that job?
Well, first, thank you very much for the kind words. No, I think the number one thing is the people I was working with at Apple I was just very lucky, and I don't say that. You know, I think they're some of the best folks in the business, and that's not. I understand it's high praise, but they really know what they're doing. Especially my team. So my manager and the engineers I was working with, they really helped me a ton. I mean, sitting down with me and walking me through just the basics of building the graphic stack and how how some of the details of the driver and whatnot. And so a lot of it just came as a result of people being willing to help and just showing me the ropes. I think that alone accounts for at least 75% of my success there.
So
I think so.
So I'm gonna agree, of course. Like your team is gonna be important, right? But
you're being too humble.
Yeah, I mean that's it. Like, and there's nothing wrong with being too humble, but I'm gonna boost his ego like a little bit, because it was the same thing. Like Rachel was super humble, and Kevin was, and Randy was, and so Serge is being really humble right now, because like he said, like all these people deserve to be there, and of course, again, it's thanks to his team, but also like he got hired there, and
by nature of you being there, you deserve to be there as well.
But then I remember I was right before the show, I was talking with Serge, and our game team was at least one of the first game teams. Like our year, there was two
at DigiPen.
At DigiPen, yeah. There was two guys in particular. One guy named Jared, which he still actually works at Apple, I believe. And then Serge, and they were at least one of the first teams to get full 3D animation working in a game at DigiPen. Maybe one or two of the years before, but yeah, like, so Serge was really good. And then also just really quick, I also remember when Serge he got flown out to San Francisco or wherever, to Cupertino, to do the Apple interview, and he came back and we were talking about it, and I was asking how the interview went, and he was like, "Oh, they asked some really tough questions." One of the questions that they asked him, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Serge, but they asked him to do like the triangle rasterization algorithm, and he said like, "Oh, like I think I got it," and I knew right then, I was like, "You got hired." I go, people don't ask that question in an interview, and like the fact that you think that you got close. So I don't know what you think about that, Serge, but like, I appreciate you being humble, but you're also super smart.
Yeah, and
yeah, no, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, just thank you so much. But yeah, I mean, I'll say straight up that the interview was pretty tough. Like no joke, it was an entire day. Yeah, it was an entire day, and there were a lot of hard questions. And I remember coming out of it and thinking, wow, that was I think I used all my ammo. Like it was from 3D graphics all the way down to like specific about programming, and also like hardware in general. I remember one question that was about like, just give me like it was a chat about the PS3 cell processor architecture. And it was like, man, I've never even seen a cell processor, in a dev kit. So, but I knew enough to just like discuss it, and I understand the high level concept of it. And yeah, it went down to like, specifics about like, how do you do lighting in 3D rendering and all that. And yeah, the basic linked list question and whatnot. So yeah, I remember it being very tough, and I remember coming out of it thinking, yeah, I've really pushed very hard on this one. So it was hard, and I felt at the end of the day when I got the offer, I felt, yeah, I think I deserve to be here, because I think I felt overall I did pretty well at the interview. It's not always been the case. I've interviewed at a bunch of companies, and there are times when I came out and I felt like, yeah, there's no way I'm getting that job. Absolutely. So at that moment, yeah, I felt like, if anything, I think I'm pretty prepared to start my career there.
So I have a few questions about this job at Apple. We'll kind of try to quick fire through some of these. My first one, you saying all of this kind of just reminds me of the quote, like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So you can work with this amazing team of people, but if you're not willing to put in the work to receive what they're teaching you, or go outside of work to learn that thing, you're not ultimately going to get anywhere. So what were you doing? What do you kind of praise yourself for doing well while you were working there, to get as much out of that experience as possible, learn as much from those people as possible, and maybe in your own time, continue to learn the things that you guys were talking about?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I think number one is there is no substitute for hard work. I think that's just like I mean, Matt and I have discussed that many times. I think it's not. I haven't listened to all the podcasts, but I'm pretty sure that Matt has probably made it clear that hard work is very important, and he's a firm believer in it, and so am I. So the first thing you got to do is you got to put in the work, right? That means you have to go in there, and you have to read a lot of code. You have to do a lot of code reviews whenever possible, whenever the opportunity arises. You have to just look at a lot of code and try to read it, understand it, write down some questions you might have, like, hey, what's going on with this module here? Like, that's memory allocation, right? Like, I mean, I'm using buffers left and right, but where does this memory come from? Who's managing it, for instance, right? Or you're using a lot of shaders, obviously, left and right, because it's graphics. What does the compiler pipeline look like? And it may not be your immediate you may not need it in your immediate bug or the thing you're working on, but just put it somewhere, put a pin on it, and then whenever you have some breathing room, just go back and start digging into this, and then ask the questions, right? Like just go out there and just put yourself out there. Like, I don't understand what this is. I don't get it. Like that's one thing that I've never had. I've never been ashamed to say that I don't understand something. I've never had any problems telling somebody I don't know how this works. That's not a problem for me, and I think it shouldn't be a problem for anybody. And so just go out there. But once you say that question, now you got to be in listening mode, right? Because you better not come again 20 times and then just still not understand that. I mean, unless there is a fundamental problem. So you got to do these three things. You know, work hard, be curious about all kinds of areas in the code, and then go to the people, go to the code reviews, and try to just ask questions, and then take a bunch of notes, right? Like fill out an entire notebook of just random stuff, like basic diagrams, basic class names, basic variable names, just basic stuff that at some point you're going to go back and say, oh yeah, I know what's going on here. I think that to me is probably the most important things.
So yeah, I think you said something really good. Like I always like even when I was in school, I thought I was like good at learning, right? But I think I was still a little bit shy about asking questions. And so when I was a teacher, I used to tell my students, don't be like be the one who's brave enough to ask the questions. But here's something else I remember about Serge in school is Serge was always willing to ask questions. And like we didn't always sit together. We weren't always like best buds, but like I remember like freshman and sophomore year, he was asking a lot of questions, and that transferred like all the way up through senior year. The thing that I remember though is uh, like people are worried about seeming like an idiot if you don't ask if you ask a question. But I remember thinking, watching Serge ask a lot of questions, I was like, he's smart.
Yeah, he doesn't seem.
He understands this more than me because he knows the questions to ask.
Yeah,
I thought that was great.
yeah. So yeah, I completely agree. It's worth mentioning though that it's worth doing some due diligence before bombarding somebody with questions.
Sure.
But no, but yeah, for sure. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is what did Apple do well in terms of like encouraging you guys to ask questions? Like what did like the team structure look like? How did it lend itself well to you guys collaborating and getting as much information out of each other as possible? Was it like a scrum team? Like how were you guys organized?
Yeah, I mean, I I personally don't put a lot of stock in the team's organization. And honestly, Apple's team organization was fairly forgettable. I think there was just I had a manager, and initially there were five of us, and then the team grew, and then the things got broken down into specific areas of expertise and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we're all in the same building. So yeah,
But you
I
felt
don't
like
think Apple.
sorry, did you feel like Apple's culture was like or like encouraging of collaboration and asking questions and things like that?
Well, definitely in our department, because yeah, that was not really. Well, actually, I should be more specific here. I think Apple as a company, and it's well known fact that it's very secretive. So obviously, and I can say that because I've actually experienced different companies, and different ways of doing tech. Um, so I don't know if Apple as a company in general was was encouraging its engineers to just talk amongst each other and just share information freely amongst each other. Um, I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure it was not the case, depending on what the topic was. But for me, specifically in the GQ software team, it was actually very easy for me to ask anybody else in the team, regardless of their seniority, regardless of like which specific sub team they were part of. Ask any question. That was very easy. I remember going to the OpenGL team who were working on the OpenGL framework, even though I was part of the driver team, and I could ask them questions. It was no problem because the code was shared. So I don't know if it's Apple, and I don't know if Apple did anything in particular to encourage that, because I think that was your question.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a tougher question, kind of circling back to what I said just a minute ago. Um, I've definitely worked with them. Maybe you have too. I'm sure you've seen developers that like because I'm sure you've been in like senior roles or roles where you manage other people, and you've probably experienced maybe junior developers that ask questions without doing any like due diligence? Like, how would you handle a situation like that where it's because there's a fine line between knowing as much as you can, researching as much as you can, asking valid and constructive questions versus just like giving up at the word go and asking away. How do you like how do you find that line of like what's appropriate, and what advice do you have for somebody that maybe isn't doing their due diligence?
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question. I think you're touching on something that I think is almost philosophical, because like, when do you know you've done enough due diligence? Obviously, I think we can all agree that you do need to do some. Well, first of all, before you can even ask a question, before you can even formulate the question, that bounces back to what Matt was saying. You need a basic understanding of something before you can even ask a question. You're not going to just show up and say, just your question has to be specific. So for you to even be able to formulate that question, you need to do some basic research, right? So if I said something about, I would not knock on somebody's door and say, explain to me the shader compiler pipeline. Like that is too vague, that is too broad, that is not specific.
Yeah.
I would say, for instance, I'm looking at the way two processes are sharing this buffer which contains the compiled code, right? But I don't understand, how that specifically happens. And I'm pointing at an area of the code which I have a rough understanding of, but I don't understand enough of it. And I mean, at this point, it's up to you. You just, do you want to keep chasing the rabbit down the rabbit hole and just bounce around and spend hours and hours just like understanding on your own? In which case, maybe keep doing that. You don't need to ask any question. If that feels right to you, if you're still able to make progress and understand and shed some light on the topic, great, good for you. But at some point, you're going to hit a block, and maybe things are too complex or too hairy, and you just want somebody to just explain things to you. And then at that point, I think it's perfectly fine to just ask the question.
Yeah, well, for such a difficult question, that was actually a really good and kind of profound answer, because that is kind of what I was getting at, where, there's a difference between why doesn't this work? And like,
Yeah.
I've really focused a lot of attention on this area. This part's not working. What do you think? Like, come with a good answer.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's a.
So my advice, and this is what I do personally, and I can give examples, but my advice is always to err on the side of me doing more work and not bugging the senior people.
Right.
So like a good example, actually, in my first job in Las Vegas, like I keep saying, I didn't know much about like uh, web web development stuff. I came from games. I had never made like HTTP calls or like API calls. I didn't know anything about databases or SQL. So one of the senior developers, so one of my tasks was obviously building the app, but also building the backend that managed the database for the app. But I didn't know anything about that. So one of the senior developers offered to give like, hey, like we can do a meeting and we can talk about like the basics of this. But I, I already had like an account for LinkedIn Learning and stuff like Pluralsight or what. I think there was a free Pluralsight at that company. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that, but let me go watch like 2 or 3 hours worth of videos first.
Mhm.
Because like I go, there's a whole bunch of basic stuff that you might spend explaining when somebody else has already explained it for me, and I can just go watch that first. And then in the end, uh, I mean, yeah. So then I would start throwing questions to her that were like more higher level. So again,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's my thing, is like err on the side of I'd rather waste my time, 2 or 3 hours of my time, and then go to the senior or the teacher or the whoever, and then be more educated on the topic.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was like kind of pushing on that due diligence thing, because you had mentioned that Serge asked a lot of questions,
Mhm.
but it still was obvious that he was really smart and
They
talented,
were
and
they were intelligent questions.
yeah, because we've all seen people too that ask a whole bunch of questions, and
Yeah.
yeah, they're not so constructive to the class or to them.
Mhm.
It's just, why doesn't this work or whatever.
Yeah.
So okay, so moving on a little bit from Apple, what was kind of your path after that? Where did you go next?
After Apple, I went to Amazon. I went to Lab 126, which is the hardware division of Amazon.
Were you also doing like graphics drivers there?
So initially, a lot of the job involved just doing SoC evaluation. So trying to look at the claims of various vendors regarding performance in particular, but it could also be a bunch of other metrics. But for me, it was performance of the GPU and a little bit to some extent of the CPU, and then seeing if that matches your own results. So a lot of it was that. But then I stayed there 3 years. I stayed there 3 years, so the teams got reshuffled, and towards the end, I was actually helping the machine learning or AI team essentially optimize some of their code for the GPU for GPU workloads whenever possible.
Was there something like specific that you were working on, like a consumer product, or was this something behind the scenes?
So it was a framework. So all of the AI stuff was used by Alexa, and then obviously different products, from vision, like the cameras and some of the Alexa products. But initially, I mean, it was not for any specific product. It was for the all of the machine learning efforts. That was in the later years. But initially, so the SoC validation was also not for any specific product, although some of the work, ended up going into the Fire Stick, which was like it was like essentially all the stuff from the Fire TV, but in a very small form factor and much cheaper.
Yeah, that seems. Yeah, I think I understand even kind of Cole's question, because when I think about Amazon, I don't immediately think about graphics, and so yeah, like some of the machine learning stuff makes a lot of sense. I guess, yeah, and he's talking about like SSE, like the SIMD instructions for like high performance math. Yeah, but I guess that's just interesting to me, because I wouldn't imagine that Amazon is doing anything like crunching numbers floating point. Maybe that's just the limit of my knowledge. Like I don't know anything about machine learning either, but like yeah, it's just yeah, that's really cool but really interesting.
Yeah, that is really cool. To the listeners, all I know is the consumer side of Amazon, so I
Yeah.
don't really well, no, like the AWS side, but that's cool. That's really awesome that you can say that you've worked on something that was in Alexa and Fire Stick,
Yeah,
and that's super cool. How would you say that, like, culturally or just anything, like how did Amazon really like differ from Apple? Like, what was your experience there?
Yeah, it's very interesting because so like I
So that
think
was
I
kind
think
of a vague
in many ways,
question, but
yeah, no, I mean I understand the core of it. I think the two were very different, and that's actually I think for me that's what's been very interesting. Like going to some of these big companies and just seeing from the inside just how different they are. Because on the outside you might like you know they're always lumped together as like big tech or whatever, but then you get
the
into the
FANG
details and you
companies
realize,
or
well,
whatever.
yeah, the fan companies
Yeah.
exactly. And then at the end of the day, you just drill down to the specifics, and then they're actually very different. So Amazon is really built of many small companies. In fact, Lab 126, for all intents and purposes, is its own company with its own, head. I don't even know if it's a CEO, but director or whatnot. And it's physically in a very different location from the headquarters, which is in Seattle. Which is Apple is very different. Apple they do have smaller teams or smaller locations all over the world, but the vast majority of it is in Cupertino, and that's the headquarters. So it was different in the sense that I guess we felt more like we were part of a different company inside Amazon. Like it was like none of us really thought about the like the store or AWS and whatnot. So it was different, and it felt in that sense it felt much smaller. Like it felt like we were having team meetings with I mean VPs and people very high up in the organization telling us about roadmaps and where they wanted to take the brand and the product. And I had zero exposure to that at Apple. At Apple, it was
No.
everything above me was really a black box, right? Because you can't talk about anything about any product. At Apple, but here I was looking, I was receiving emails with documents that were laying out some prototypes of some stuff that we might want to do, or just having some really a lot of cool ideas about some interesting projects, and they were all readily available to us. And I don't think the company leaked any more than any other tech company. So it felt much more open. It felt open. It felt much more like it felt much more inclusive from like a strategic standpoint. Like, this is the things we're thinking of, folks. Like, tell us what you think. I think that was probably the biggest difference.
There's this book that it actually just came out, I think, this month. It's called Always Day One, and that quote is like, I don't know if it's one of the core values of Amazon, but that's kind of like their attitude for staying ahead. It's like, it's always day one, and he kind of talks about the culture of Amazon and Facebook and Google versus Apple, and it's actually really interesting to talk with Serge because he can like talk about all of these companies. But yeah, like they do tell the story about how it's like some of these companies like Amazon and Google are like really open and engineer focused, right? And so like they try to be open, and so and get ideas from every level in the hierarchy. Whereas Apple was founded by like Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs was that genius visionary, right? And so like everything was kind of came down from the top. And so at least in the book, it's kind of saying what Serge is saying. It's a lot of it was like, you don't talk about it. It's secretive. You can get fired. Like, somebody had filmed, like they took a picture of somebody else who happened to be testing one of the like early iPhones, like iPhone 4 or something, before it got released. And that person got fired. And so there was no second chances when it came to that, because Apple was so secretive, because like they knew that the, what do you call them, like the DC stuff like that, though, and like the Apple launches are so important to the company.
Yeah. As an employee, is it bothersome that's like the culture at Apple, or is it just kind of, it is what it is? Like, was it refreshing to be at Amazon where it was a little bit more inclusive, or does it not really matter to you? It's just, one versus the other.
I think it depends on the engineer. I've definitely talked about this with a lot of folks, and I have a lot of friends who are still working at Apple, and for them it doesn't really bother them, because I think they're seeing the I guess the flip side of the coin, which is that when Apple lands a product, they land it pretty hard, and then people tend to often be pretty blown away, and also I think there is, generally speaking, which I can respect in some regard, that there is a trust of the chain of command. There's a trust of the upper management that's like, whatever comes down the pipeline is going to be good. And I think Apple has a track record of delivering. Now, as you said, Cole, this is inherited from the Steve Jobs era. Tim Cook is a very different CEO, so we'll see where that goes going forward. But I think a lot of people are fine with just receiving the orders top down, and then just focusing on whatever the immediate goal is. For me, I felt like at that time in my career, I definitely wanted to experience something different, and so it was very refreshing and very welcoming to have that other way of doing tech. Yeah, so I think for me it felt very good.
So obviously, like, as an outsider looking in, obviously everybody recognizes that Tim Cook is quite a bit different than Steve Jobs. But as an employee of Apple, what does that mean to you? How are they different to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would not expect there to be any difference for the average employee of Apple. I don't really think. I just meant that I said that to mean that Apple was very much top down, and it was fine because I think in many ways, Steve Jobs was great at his job, which was to create tech and identify needs and so on and so forth. I don't know if Tim Cook has the same strengths, but either way, I don't feel it. I don't know if it directly trickles down to you as an employee. Like if you're writing a driver under Steve Jobs, or if you're writing a driver under Tim Cook, I don't really think it makes a difference, right?
I gotcha. I just didn't know you made a point to mention it, so I didn't know if there was like something specific that you meant by that. But kind of on the topic of like top down, as an employee of Apple, or I'd be curious to hear the same thing at Amazon. How do you feel like, or like, how easy is it for you if you have an idea to get that up the chain? And like, is it possible for you to have some good idea that makes it to to deployment, or how does that look at those companies?
Yeah, so I think at Amazon, I remember specifically there were round tables. Like you could actually sit down and discuss some ideas you had, and they're encouraging straight up. Like if you have an idea, write a basic thin paper, and then
they call them like 6-pagers or something, right? Like you write up some little document, and it can go all the way up to the top. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, concretely speaking, I don't know where those papers go. Obviously, I've never had such idea, and I've never been through the process. I just know of the process. So I think, yeah. So I know definitely that there is a way to just submit an idea and just express it. Now I don't know how it's picked up, where that goes from there, and what the logistics are of like actually implementing it.
Gotcha. Well, I want to have time to go through your timeline. So let's move on to the next one. So where'd you go after Amazon?
After Amazon, I had a choice between going to Tesla or going to AMD.
Look at this guy.
Yeah, man, this is crazy.
This is going to be our top interview.
Yeah.
What's happening here? That's awesome.
Former Apple, Amazon, almost Tesla, AMD. It's crazy.
That's cool.
So, and you ended up choosing AMD, right?
Yeah, I ended up choosing AMD, and I actually had a phone call with Jim Keller. I don't know if you know him, but he actually used to work for AMD and Apple. He's a pretty brilliant chip designer. But yeah, he told me we had a discussion about because he was very open about. Well, obviously, he was at Tesla at the time, and he wanted me to join, and we had a very interesting discussion on which way to go. But anyway, I ended up going to AMD because I was very keen to work on their GPU accelerated ray tracer for it's called Radeon ProRender. It's used in in film and in the video game industry, and it's I mean I was very excited to try to work on like essentially a product that was about a topic that I was so interested in, which is ray tracing.
So I want to come back to that, but to clarify, you're saying that this guy that you interviewed with worked at Tesla, but he was a former AMD employee, and you told him that you had an option between the two.
And former Apple employee.
And former Apple.
Chip designer.
So you talked to him, and he was trying to convince you to come to Tesla, but he had worked at AMD previously?
Yeah. So the recruiter at the time thought that it was probably a good idea to put me in touch with that person, so they could just give me their take on the difference between the two companies. I'm just bringing that up because I thought I thought it was very nice of him to talk to me, and I thought that it was very interesting to see his perspective. And actually, if your listeners are interested, or if you're interested, just googling Jim Keller is actually pretty famous.
That's really cool, man. That's awesome. That's cool that you guys were able to have sounds like a sort of candid conversation about one versus the other. So you were obviously interested in ray tracing, you said, so you decided to go over to AMD. So what did that look like? What did you work on, and was it what you hoped it would be?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was not what I hoped it would be, because I stayed there a year and a half. So obviously some things worked out great, and other things worked out, maybe not, were suboptimal. But yeah, I mean, on the plus side, I think I got some exposure to what I think is a very powerful software. We got to work with some really talented people, and I thought it was very. I learned a lot. I learned a lot there. It was a much smaller team. We had more freedom to just explore, various strategies, and it was interesting. And obviously, the topic of ray tracing was extremely interesting, in particular, on the GPU. So I thought it would be pretty cool, and I did learn a lot. So that was a big plus for me. But ultimately, I thought this was not really the place for me to have a long-term career, and I just
I can't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I just switched to Google after a year and a half.
Yeah, so I kind of remember like Serge had called me, I think around the time that I don't know if he hadn't switched to Google at this point, but I think he was thinking of it, and I had just started at VShred, and like maybe I'd worked here for like four months or 5 months, and I just remember talking about, he was saying that like a little bit that it was kind of what he was saying. It wasn't exactly what he said, and he was worried he wasn't, like he said he was learning a lot, but like I was telling him how like exciting working at like the startup was, and how much impact it felt like we were having. And I remember at the time he was really excited for me. He's like, wow, that sounds really cool. And I don't know if he ever actually downloaded any of the VShred stuff, but
Yeah. So I kind of want to geek out a little bit here. Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old. What does it mean if you're working on like the drivers and you're working on ray tracing? Like from a high level, I get the idea of ray tracing, what it does in a game, what it means, and sort of like from a software level, maybe what that looks like. But what does that look like for you? Because I would have to imagine, I'm not a genius at all on game development. I know very little about it, but I would imagine that like the engine that you're using is going to have some software level for ray tracing. But you're also saying that you have to do that on the driver level as well. What does that look like?
Yeah, I can see that. So let me try to detangle a few things.
Okay.
So yes, so number one at AMD in particular, although it's also a GPU vendor, which also has a driver team. I had no work in the driver team. The Radeon team was a completely separate team. Number one. Number two, at the time, GPU accelerated ray tracing meant something different from today. Today, NVIDIA introduced it, and then AMD followed later. There are some hardware blocks that help in the ray tracing algorithm. It's an actual piece of hardware that is in the GPU, and that is leveraged by the gaming industry. Now, the Radeon Pro Render software, that was not using any of that. At that time, it was not using any of that. It was just using the fact that the GPU has some general purpose compute hardware, ALUs, and it was running the ray tracing algorithm on that as if it were just a general purpose compute program. Compute had been around for a long time at that point. And then the reason why you want to do that is because GPUs are very the hardware layout and the way a GPU is designed is really conducive to accelerating algorithms like ray tracing, because it's embarrassingly parallel. Each ray is essentially doing its own thing, and so you can do a lot. You can leverage that and get a lot of speed ups on the GPU that has, it's not unusual there for a GPU to have like many thousands of concurrent threads running at the same time on their own individual hardware threads. So it's not, So that's what I was doing. It was no driver, and it was not any of the new RTX or DXR ray tracing stuff.
Okay. So this is like the early version of ray tracing was done a different way than what they're doing now, is what you're saying?
I mean, not quite. For gaming in particular, that is new. But for like the likes of Pixar, right, or any of these other uh, any of these other companies that also use ray tracing, but not for real time. This is
I
offline ray
see.
tracing, where they have a bunch of machines doing ray tracing to get a very high quality image out of out of that, or any of the special effects studios and all that. They're also using ray tracing, and they've been doing so for a very long time. And there are no it's all confusing because for a long time they're all doing it on the CPU. Then a lot of them started doing it on the GPU, and then now the GPU has like special hardware blocks that accelerate ray tracing, which they used to not have at all. So this is yet one more layer to the cake. So
So
it's kind
when
of tangled.
when they do real-time ray tracing, do they still use that same hardware block that you're talking about, or that is just completely different?
That's right. So when you do real time ray tracing, like let's say you're playing a game and then you see some like really cool reflection off of a like a shiny surface, that is real time ray tracing, and that is almost certainly using the hardware blocks on your PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X or NVIDIA RTX or AMD 6000 GPUs. So this in this case, because it's a game and it's a real time setting, they're almost all using this hardware block. So
I
this
would
is
have
pretty new. This is
Yeah, I would say it's probably hard to imagine at one point that it would be possible to do in real time. And I know it's still really hard. My computer that I have has an RTX 2060. It's not like a crazy like top of the line card, but it's also a fairly new and pretty nice card. And it even struggles with doing real time ray tracing. It can do it, but I'm not going to be pushing more than maybe like 30 frames per second or something. It's really taxing, but I'm sure it's really cool to the community that builds that stuff to see it finally becoming somewhat possible to do that in real time. I mean, it's really cool. It's super taxing, I'm sure.
Serge, when we were in school, did you take that ray tracing course, the CS 500?
oh yeah. I did
Yeah.
with
So yeah,
yeah.
with Hanson, yeah, yeah. So I remember, yeah, I didn't take that course, but I do remember, uh, like that was all you were just building a single frame. Like there was nothing real time about that. But I also remember I wanted to take that course, but I ended up going to Singapore, and they didn't offer it there. But I remember at that time. There was a video online where somebody had hooked up like 3 PlayStation 3s so that they could do just a car, like one car model in real time, do like quote unquote real time ray tracing. They had to hook up like 3 PlayStation 3s with all those cell processors or whatever. And so I thought that was interesting.
That is crazy. I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
it's funny to me as again somebody that doesn't really understand game development to hear basically what it's doing. Like I get that, we had kind of talked and it's sort of the inverse of what happens in real life as far as how the reflections and the shadows get to their place, right? Like it comes from the opposite end
For rasterization.
for ray tracing,
Ray
right?
tracing, well, yeah, I guess. Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, because like, and Serge can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, like ray tracing is shooting a ray out from every pixel into the world and then seeing what that reflects with. So yeah, I guess whereas like obviously in real life, light is bouncing off of other stuff and coming to our eye,
Right.
which is like in a way that's what rasterization is doing.
Because you were saying, right, like light in real life comes from a source and it reflects off of all these sources until it gets to its maybe final destination, whatever that means. But in ray tracing in video games, you're finding a pixel in space and it's looking out and reflecting off to
Yeah,
see,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Isn't that right? Am I
Yeah.
correct on that, Serge?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. You're starting at it all starts at the pixel, because you
Yeah.
would be too you would be too wasteful to start at now. I mean, obviously we can get into details, but there are some ray tracing techniques that actually do a hybrid approach where they also do cast some rays from the light source and let it bounce around, and also cast all the rays from the pixel. And essentially, they're trying to find they're trying to match paths, or they're trying to connect paths between these two.
Oh, interesting. That's
between
cool.
Yeah, because part of the problem obviously is that, like, let's say you have, and in the real world that would never happen, but let's say you're in a corridor, and then there is like a room with a door that's partially open, and then there is a light, behind that door inside that room. There is no way you're going to hit it, right? Like, if you cast rays from the eye perspective, from the pixel, you will never. It's extremely unlikely that you're ever going to hit the light. So what these renderers try to do is they try to do the hybrid approach, where they also cast light from the ray, from the light, which let it bounce around in the room, and hopefully eventually it will find its way out of that room, into the let's say the hallway or the corridor. And then at that point they would be intercepted by the rays that are coming from the eye. And then now you've connected what are in the real world would be actually valid paths, and then you would see some light coming into your camera.
Do they?
So it gets
Sorry.
very, very complex.
Yeah. Do they do that to optimize? Because obviously, like, me as a character moving around, that needs to be computed every frame, but the light source is static. So like they could potentially cast all those rays like ahead of time. Do you think that's one of the reasons why they do that?
Yeah, so I was talking in the context of like offline rendering. Like in real-time rendering, you would never do that. In fact, the next point I wanted to make is that in real-time rendering, you're also not in those games that you're playing today on your 2060, for instance, like Battlefield 5 or whatever. You're still doing rasterization, right? So you're not casting any rays from the pixel. That would just be too expensive. You're doing rasterization because it's a great algorithm, and it works very well in many situations. But then for the pixels that end up like being on like a very specular reflective surface, and you're trying to compute in real time, like, okay, what does that surface look like? That's when you start using the ray tracing. You can say, okay, I'm going to cast a ray, from this on this world surface, which came, which is what this pixel is trying to render, and then at that point you cast a ray into the scene and try to like do some more lighting computations. Again, it gets pretty complicated, but that's the idea. So what we have today is a hybrid approach where all the pixels are rasterized, but some pixels on top of being rasterized also use ray tracing for some of the lighting computations to have like an accurate result, essentially.
That makes sense. So when you turn ray tracing on, it is still mostly rasterization with some like maybe more like critical details.
Yeah, you're just getting. So I guess so for people who might not know, specular, he said, just means shiny, just like a shiny surface. Like this specular is one property of a surface, and so yeah, I didn't know that either, but.
That makes sense though, because
yeah.
a lot of these games, obviously it sounds like they've been using rasterization for many years, and it's really good. I mean, it seems really good. Like it seems like they can still get some really accurate shadows. But for sure, when you turn on ray tracing on like Battlefield 5, I've seen it on there. It is crazy. Like there are some details that just pop that like you did not see before, and some much more accurate little crevices and stuff have like better shadows and stuff. So that's really cool. Okay, well, it's been really cool talking about ray tracing, but we don't have a whole lot of time left, so I just want to make sure that we can finally get to like the end of your journey here. So was AMD the last job before the one that you have now?
Yes.
So where are you at now?
Right now, I work at Google. I work on Stadia.
Okay, and so I would actually that's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah, we talked about Stadia on the podcast before too.
So yeah, I would love to get your thoughts on Stadia and just the idea of like cloud computing for gaming, and if you think that's the future, and what challenges are out there right now. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's gonna be hard to cram that in.
It is.
Oh, geez.
It's
and you got 2 minutes to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of challenges. I think it's many have attempted this. There are a lot of challenges, and I think the biggest challenge we have today is actually just convincing gamers to come on board, because we're dealing with a market that is used to essentially today any gamer that wants to play a game already has a platform to play that game on, right? Either your phone, either your gaming laptop, I mean your gaming PC, or your consoles. You already have that. So now the proposition is that we're gonna take essentially the gaming experience and put it up in the cloud. It has a lot of very appealing aspects. Like for instance, you don't have to download an update, you don't have to download anything, you don't have to have a day one patch when you buy your game, you don't have to wait until it's midnight to just download and start playing. You can just play it at the click of a button. There are a lot of very interesting aspects of it, but obviously the problem is this is a fairly saturated market, and a lot of people who wanted to do gaming, they already can. And that's also that's before we even start talking about the exclusives, right? Because a lot of people are excited about the Xbox exclusive or the PlayStation exclusive, so they will need to get, or the Nintendo exclusive. They will need to buy the corresponding hardware or get into the corresponding platform. And they've probably already done so. So now they already have this hardware ready to go. So it's difficult, it's complicated, but I think we're gaining a lot of momentum here at Stadia. And when we look around, you see a lot of obviously Amazon announced their own version of cloud gaming, and Nvidia had its own something similar to Stadia as well, and Microsoft has also they've had xCloud. So the industry, and I think they've picked up the message, and they're really trying to push in that direction. Now, I think ultimately it will be up to the gamer to decide.
Well, so let me ask you this: since we don't have a whole lot of time to talk about the topic, just from my perspective, I just want to ask one question about probably the only thing, because I see the value proposition. I don't play a whole lot of games, but as somebody that at least plays some, I see the value there. It would be an easy sell for me. The only one hiccup that I see with the whole thing is just the latency issue. And for like professional gamers, especially, or people that take it really seriously, that's going to be the hardest thing. So I'm just curious, like, what are you guys doing to get around that when in reality, there's some gamers that are obsessive about having a 1 millisecond response time monitor and, all of that. So how do you get around that when the latency over the cloud is going to be just a whole lot more than what you've got if the hardware is right next to you?
I can't tell you that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
But it's on their mind. This is something that everybody's thinking about, right?
Yeah. No. I mean, it's just a cheeky response, but no, you're right. I mean, it is. So first of all, like if you're talking about professional gamers, it's clear that there's going to be heterogeneous world. There's going to be some people who will stick to the hardware that is right in front of them because they can't cope with latency. Obviously, latency on Stadia is going to improve. At all levels. From top to bottom, there will always be improvements, and then there will always be people who will think they don't think it's right for them, so they might stick to the other platform that they think is right for them. So that's always going to be the case. The latency is going to improve, and it's going to be driven down by a number of factors. And so obviously there are a lot of exciting, interesting stuff down the pipeline.
But also like for some like I kind of, you both said this. For some gamers, it's just not going to be that important. You're right. Like if you're playing a first-person shooter, like any of these Twitch games, it's going to be really important. But if I'm playing like Fable 6 or whatever, it's like a single-player experience, and I'm just having fun. Like I want to switch over to Fable, I can play that, and then go play Batman. And like these are single-player experiences. Maybe that latency. I haven't tried any of these platforms, but maybe it's just not that big of a deal for me. And I don't particularly like the Twitch multiplayer games. That's just not my style.
That's a good point. If you're not playing against other players, then maybe it's not as big of a deal. Well, hey, look, so we're kind of getting to the end here. I know that we're kind of pushing on that hour that we had. So really the last question that we have for you, we do this with everybody that comes on. It can just be a 60-second or less answer. what do you think if you're a new programmer looking to get into the industry? What worked for you? What advice do you have for them? What's like maybe the single biggest piece of advice you can give somebody while they're learning, and something that helped you get to where you're at? Just high level.
Well, yeah, okay. Uh, I don't know.
Okay.
I
Maybe
can feel
another
the
way to
pressure
think
to
about
be.
it. Go ahead. What was that?
Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, just maybe another way to think about it is, so you've been graduated for like 10 or 11 years now, and obviously we went to school for 4 years. If you went back and you could give yourself some advice, so whatever, like learning advice or career advice, what advice would you give your 10 years in the past self?
Better way to phrase it.
Yes, it's different words, but the question is still as hard. Like
it's the same. I know.
Well, how about this then? I can kind of answer. The thing that stood out to me while you were talking was just, you said there's no substitute for hard work, and just be willing to put in that time. I think that's what I took away from what you said. And it's not really we're not looking for like an in-depth answer. It's just like what would you tell somebody that's looking to get into it that is really gonna help them move as quickly as possible? And I think
yeah. So I think I get it. I actually think that like focus on what you like, because at the end of the day, like you said, there is no substitute for hard work, and there is also no substitute for time. It will take time for you to acquire the skills you need to be good at your job, or to do something like to solve a complex problem, like you name it. I don't know. You want to work at SpaceX and like put a probe on the moon or something. These are complex problems, and from an engineering standpoint, it's always going to take time. So find something you like, because you're more likely to work hard and consistently hard when the topic that you're working on is interesting. And the great thing about engineering and programming in general is that it's like medicine. There's so many areas you can focus on. So just pick something you like, and then just drill on it. Most likely you're going to learn a lot of stuff that that may be peripheral to that topic, that may be something related about memory management, or about CPU architecture, or about the cloud, or whatever. But you will learn it because you're trying to really drill down to the specifics of something that you enjoy. And so keep doing that. Find what you like, and try to go as far into it as you can, because in doing so, I think you're gonna learn a lot, and hopefully it's gonna be enjoyable, because at the end of the day, life is short, so just do something you enjoy.
Yeah, that's awesome advice, and something I love telling people. Just make sure that you like what you're doing, because if you do, it'll be easier to work hard, it'll be more rewarding, and you're going to be far more likely to dive in and really get into it. So awesome, man.
Exactly.
Serge, we really appreciate you coming on. It's been really cool talking to you. It's really cool getting the perspective of somebody that's worked at so many really big companies. So again, we really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. It was really fun, and good luck with the podcast. And it sounds like you're tackling interesting topics. So
yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, that's episode 27, everybody. Thanks for tuning in this week, and we will see you guys next week. Later, guys.
Bye.
Bye.